Finally, there is an easy and cost-efficient way to connect all your surrounding systems to SharePoint. Hi, I'm Matt from Skybow, and I will show you our HTTP triggers. I have a couple of scenarios prepared. One, and the most probably the most powerful one is you can now connect external systems. In my scenario, I will show you how I can connect the Zendesk, our ticketing system and portal, to a SharePoint. And this external system can send data and data to our trigger endpoint. And then in the trigger, we can make, as usual, our actions and do something in SharePoint or send emails or do what we want. So next to Zendesk, you can also imagine SAP, Dynamics, all other systems. If there's something added, if there's something changed, this can notify our endpoint, and then we can do something with this. That's really powerful if you want to connect external systems. Another scenario is if you have an online form somewhere, an anonymous form, and you want to pass the data that is entered to that form into your SharePoint site. So that's also possible if this form solution has a web service or webhook possibility, then you can do that as well. And last but not least, maybe a little bit more specific use case, but we had that before in our cases, is some of our actions are only possible in the background. So for example, all our M365 actions, they only work in the background. So we cannot do them on the forum. So the client-side actions, they will not allow you to execute them. Or if you want to set permissions, that's another thing that is normally not possible for normal users. So normal user has no permissions to change permissions. So on a button click, you can trigger an action in the background, which will then do stuff with, for example, higher privileges. Yes, those are my three main scenarios. So external system to access this endpoint, but also from internal. So a user can click there and execute the things. Of course, there are many more, and I would be really interested if you have some other scenarios in mind. Just let us know, write them into the chat. It'd be very interesting what you can think of. All right, so maybe some of you already know this possibility from Power Automate from Microsoft. They also have this HTTP trigger, which is there, which is basically the same approach, but I would say there's a better alternative. And our alternative, our trigger has no additional costs. So if you use the HTTP trigger from Microsoft, then you need to have a premium license. And that can be quite expensive. In Skybow, it's just included with the license. Our approach is fully integrated into SharePoint. So like all our other stuff, it's working directly in SharePoint. We have access to the SharePoint actions, the SharePoint fields, everything what is there. So fully integrated. It's not like Power Automate where you need to connect to the SharePoint or to do things. We made it very simple to access files, headers, and request body to access those values. Because, for example, we automatically parse the JSON. So if you pass JSON to this trigger endpoint, we automatically parse this JSON, and it's very simple. Just with a dot, you can access all the objects and the properties right away. I will show you. Same for files. So if you pass files to this trigger, we can simply loop over those files and store them in SharePoint. I will also cover that in the demo. And maybe not relevant for all of you, but very cool as well is we also have a server product. So, or it's the same product, it runs on server, and this HTTP trigger is also available on SharePoint server. So if you have a server farm and you have also systems around like an ERP, you can also integrate these systems into your SharePoint server using our HTTP triggers. So a couple of things you have to know. So if you do packages and deployments, then every deployment gets its own URL. So each endpoint is unique. So you get a trigger URL and you get another a separate key. So our trigger always works with an API key, and you get a separate URL and a separate key. And you can find it in the maintenance dialog of the deployment. You can, if you send files, you have to switch from application JSON in the header to multi-part form data. That's just a header type you have to pass. There's also an article on our portal how to do that. We will link that in the video description that we will upload to YouTube below. Then the main difference from HTTP triggers to normal triggered action that it's triggered right away. So if you call that trigger, it just runs right away, unless there is already something in the queue. So if you have a lot of triggers happening, then of course they will go into a queue, and then they will be executed later on. But normally we have quite a lot of parallel tasks that can run, and only then it would go into the queue. But if I hit the button, for example, from a user perspective, or I fill out a form, then this trigger will start right away. And maybe some of you experienced trigger actions. They can take up to, I don't know, 30 seconds, or it can take a couple of seconds until they will start. That's just because that's how webhooks in SharePoint are working. So they're only executed from time to time. And a couple of limitations to mention. You can, if you work with files, you can pass a max of 20 files. Each file can be 20 megabytes in total. So 400 megabytes in total. And the body, if you pass a very, very large JSON, then 1 megabyte is the limitation. So some of you might have used the to send files via the body as Space64 encoded file. In our case, that's only possible for smaller files because it's limited to 1 megabyte. Bigger files you have to pass using the multi-part form data case. And we only support a couple of file types just for security reasons, that you cannot pass in any specific script files or files that could harm your system. All right, so that's from the theory. Let's jump into the demo. I have, for each scenario, I've prepared one case. And the first one I would like to show you is the case where I connect Zendesk. So in my case, I have a contract management system where I store support contracts. And on the support contract, I have tickets. And these tickets are automatically added for certain use for certain organization. So the contract is assigned to that account here. So I support Grace Yellow, and I've mapped the domains which are relevant. So everything that comes in from a user of skybow.com or skybowdemo.com, each ticket will be assigned in here. Why does it make sense? So if you want to track about your SLA, your contract, and you need to know how many tickets you have, how many are open, etc. Maybe you can imagine more time from opening, blah, blah, all these things. And you don't want to give a certain user access to Zendesk itself. So you don't need a Zendesk license to access and have a look. We can add these things to SharePoint as an example. So what I'm doing here is I have 3 triggers. Once a ticket is created, then I will add it here. When the status is changing, then I also update my ticket here. And at the very end of each ticket, we send out, or that's a default thing from Zendesk, we send out this customer satisfaction email. So it will ask the customer, hey, how was the support? And the customer can reply with good or bad. And this response, I'm also adding back to my system here. So I always have an overview of all my tickets for a certain customer, and that's the use case. To do that, I need to have that trigger from the source system. In my case, Zendesk. So if I jump over to Zendesk, if you go to the admin center, there is a possibility of, under apps and integration, there's a possibility of webhooks. You can create new webhooks, or here you see the one I created. If we have a look at that webhook report to support ticket solution, I've added my endpoint. That's my HTTP trigger that was generated when I set up the trigger. I will show you right afterward. So it's always automationskybow.com and then a specific trigger GUID. The events I specified in Zendesk, it's quite powerful. You can specify a lot of events from all different things in Zendesk. You can do that. I just took ticket events. So from the ticket events, I was choosing created when I received that customer satisfaction and when the status is changed. Only these 3. And let me go back. And in here, I can also test these webhooks. This is very cool to see each different event, the created, the received, and the status changed. You can see how your JSON, your request body that is sent to our endpoint, how this will look like. So you see the JSON, and that JSON we can then easily access. So we will have a body output JSON, and then dot detail dot I don't know, description. I can access this one here, or dot account ID. So that's as simple as this. And this way you can see what you will get from these events. So what I saw is I have a different type. So here I have a ticket created type. Here I have a ticket received, CSAT received, and so on. And this one was the main thing that I will check when the request will come, because they all are sent to the same endpoint. Of course, I could split it to different endpoints, but I have just one endpoint, and that's how it's sent. My key has been added here for security. And now if we have a look at our site, so in Solution Studio, I have under contracts, that's my contract solution, I have added a ticket list. And on the ticket list, in the background, there's trigger action. If you create a new trigger down here, give it a name, and this one here, that's the new trigger type. the one you can choose, HTTP request. It will automatically generate URL and the key for you. I will show you the one I already created. This one. This is my trigger, my key. And then under the actions, you will find this, the first action, and it's an action you cannot remove. You cannot move down or up. It's just fixed there. It's the trigger itself. We need that because we will be able to access the output properties from that trigger. So in my case, as a best practice, I'm always storing the body of the trigger that comes in. I will first store with our action. We have a new action called store file, where you can choose a file, a base64 file, or just any content. And in my case, I'm just taking the content, and because once the trigger is done, all the data is deleted. So we don't store all this data. That's why I specifically store this request body into a document library. For me, that makes it possible to have a look. If you don't have that a nice possibility as in Zendesk to see what the source system will send, you can simply store these the content in a document library like this. So everything comes in as a text, and you can see the content here, status changed in that case. So I see exactly what comes in, which makes it easier then to access. So if we have a look in the expressions, as in other cases, we always can access the outputs from previous actions. And that's why we've added that first HP trigger. That's just an action. And because it's an action, we can access the request headers, the body just as a string, as a text. Maybe you're not passing JSON, maybe you're passing XML or just a text. Then the JSON body will not work as JSON. Then it's just in the body, it's just a text. This one is parsed as JSON, and this is a collection of files or URL to files where those are uploaded. And after the trigger is done, they are deleted. So these are our output properties, and that's why I'm just taking the body and I write it into a file. That's the first action I normally do, just as a best practice. Afterwards, I have 3 conditions for my 3 webhooks. And in my condition, I'm just checking that type. And we have a type, and that's what I do. So in this specific case, I also check if the organization is set or not. But this is the main thing. Here, ticket created. This case, I go into that section. If the status is changed, here, I go into that section. That's how I separate these different events. And then, as always, I don't want to go into deep, but I can then do things, access, maybe we can have a look. If we access, when I add an item, as you can see, I can simply say request body.json, and then outside dot, I can access the properties or the objects. So detail.id, that was the value, or detail property, detail description, very simple. And yeah, that's how I import it. Same for the state, the customer satisfaction. I'm just checking if the ticket exists. If yes, I'm updating the ticket with the score and the status. So that's how I can bring in the data into that system. And to show you, I can quickly open up my, I'll go to our portal. On the support, I create a new support ticket. I will just grab some text to enter, and a text for the ticket itself. So that's how you can add a ticket. Of course, you can also send a ticket via email. It's exactly the same, but in the portal, you can also add it like this. Priority is low. I could add some attachments, but I will not import them into my support solution. Hit submit, and we will see it already started. And after 4 seconds, it's already done. If we look into the contract that was under this IT support, we can see a new ticket has been added. It's open with priority low, and my text has been added as well. So everything is in here, and now every time I change the status of that ticket, it will update it here. All right, that's scenario 1 to connect an external system. Now let's have a look at the second use case. The second use case is the public forum. For the public forum, I have created a form using Soho forms. It's just anonymous, available, and I can fill out. That's, for example, for a job application. You can put on your website. People can fill out like this, Matthias Walter. Doesn't matter. Email. Yes. I have a couple of jobs that's connected to my internal system. I have these 5 jobs at the moment. So I'm applying for this job. I could provide additional details and so on. And I can upload files. To do that, I will take 2 files here, drag them in. So I have 2 files and I hit submit. All right. Now these is submitted into my recruitment tracker solution. Now, after a couple of seconds, let's see. We will see. Not yet. Let's have a look how this works. I have this form, and in my case, this form solution also provides a possibility of integration. If I click on integration, I can add a webhook. So I have other integrations here, but one is webhook. And in the webhook, I can pass the URL. And that's the case where I have to choose multi-part form data. And it's because I'm passing files. If I would not pass file, I could go for JSON only. But this time I'm passing files. That's why I have to go for multi-part form data. Then I'm just mapping all the fields to the properties. And this will be like a flat JSON. So every property, every field is just a flat property that we can access. Output JSON dot first name, dot last name, and so on. And the files, they are passed in an array. Down here, that's the case. Our key has to be passed using a custom header called xTriggerKey. And that's it. So that's my integration. And this HP trigger sits on the recruitment tracker list, which is this one, import the candidates from the web form. And let's see, that should be today. Yes, now it should be in here. Yes, now we see it created my dossier, it created a subfolder, and it uploaded the documents. So it created a complete dossier from this anonymous online form. And if we have a look at the trigger here, in the actions, same approach. I have my trigger. I store the file first. My case, I'm just creating the candidate. That's the first thing. And as you can see, I can access all these properties just right away. It's just request body JSON dot and then the the field name. Yeah, new date is just today, notes, LinkedIn, just all very simple. After that, because it's a dossier, I'm also creating the folder in the sub-library. Normally this folder is created when I open up the item, but we will not open it up, so the folder needs to be there for me to upload the files. That's why I'm creating the folder in here. Same structure, first name, last name, ID. I create this folder. I have to set, that's a bit specific for our dossier, I have to set the lookup on that new folder. So I'm just setting the lookup to my to the item ID of my item that I have just added before from this action up here, from the add item action. And last but not least, I have a loop. And in my loop, I can simply loop over my request files array, which is the output property of the trigger. So on my trigger here, I have request files. That's an array of files or URLs to files. And when I loop over those files, I use the store file action again. And then inside, I can access, and that's described in our documentation, there's a property called path. It's an array of paths. It's a path to the file where it's stored. And this document is created in the library. I can use the folder from the create folder action as an output property. The name is taken from the file itself. So I'm just taking the same file name and that's it. So very simple. That's how I'm uploading all the files that have been attached to my trigger. All right. And last but not least, this scenario of a user executes something in the background. Therefore, I will go back to my contract solution, because in the contract solution, normally we set permissions. And that's exactly a use case we have quite often. You set permissions, or you used to set permissions using triggered actions. But the problem with triggered action is it takes some time. It can take, like I said, take 10, 30 seconds until the permissions are applied. So one solution for that is I can run these permissions using a trigger action on the save button. So when I have a look at the contract, what I've done is I added a trigger, an HTTP trigger in the background to set initial permissions. So here I'm setting the permissions, just without going into details, looking at the time. It's just, it sets the permissions here with certain logic, but I'm passing the data for which item, etc. I'm passing in triggered body. Here you see the contract ID and the owner email. Those are the two values I need for my permissions. So I added this trigger, and now from a user or client side, if I go back to my new form, I simply extended the save button, that it's saving the form, and after that, it directly starts this set initial permissions using our HTTP request action. So I'm calling the trigger action using an HTTP action from client side. The URL and the key I'm getting from a library in the background, or a list in the background, because if I would deploy that somewhere else, as I said, the URL and the key will change. So I will retrieve them from an app config list. So I have an app config list where these things are stored. Yes, and then the only thing, I'm passing the key. I say this time it's JSON. It's a post, and in here I'm simply passing the two properties I need in my background action. I need the trigger, the contract ID, and then the owner email. And it needs to be a JSON. So this is my JSON, and I'm passing it like this. And with this information, I'm calling the background service, and because it's executed right away, yeah, it will set these permissions, and it's basically set already when you open up the display form, more or less. But permissions are set in the background in maybe 2 seconds. And yeah, that's one example. There are a lot more, of course, what you can do. But of course, you have to take care or be careful because this way a user can do stuff with high privileges in the background. And this should be configured carefully, as I said. And yeah, this is the last scenario. If this video has given you lots of new ideas for your business, feel free to reach out to us and subscribe to our channel.